And we're also in Ecclesiastes chapter 2, starting in verse 12. And we're going to finish up Ecclesiastes chapter 2 tonight. And so tonight the title of the lesson is Prove It Part 2. And so we've got Prove It Part 1, obviously, which was obviously last week's lesson. And if you remember, Ecclesiastes, and of course if I had my tablet here I'd be writing this on the board, but I don't. Ecclesiastes is talking about life under the sun. It is the point in time in which, in between a person's birth, a person's death, and looking at it in it only. It's not really looking at that life from an eternal perspective or from a godly perspective or anything like that, but instead it's just simply looking at it from here's what life is. And if you remember, Solomon's thesis to all of it was what is a man gain? What is his advantage to life under the sun? And so that's what he's looking at is, if you look at life under the sun and you look at everything that goes on, what is somebody going to come out on the positive side? What's going to be the gain? What's going to be the plus after it's all said and done and over? And the answer is nothing. Okay? Period. Nothing. Whatever you do in your life, whether you do a little bit or if you do a lot of it, it's all going to be canceled out with your death. And so, to him, life is a zero-sum game. You're never going to get anything out of it. And so because of that, he comes up with the conclusion that it's meaningless, that there is nothing to life. And so what we looked at last week is he started to look a little bit of his testing of his thesis. And so his main thing was, I'm going to test my life with pleasure and see what can come of it. And yeah, there can be some fun of it, but ultimately he comes up with it's zero. It's meaningless. Whatever you do in your life, whatever fun you have, whatever enjoyment you have, whatever it is, it's always going to be taken away eventually. And so, he looked at different pleasures. He looked at folly. He looked at, let's see, what are some of the other things we saw? Self-indulgence, riches, achievements. Let's see, what else? I think there's 5 of them. We've got them on our sheet, don't we? Yeah, fleshly indulgence, accomplishment, materialism, comforts, and fame. Okay? In all those 5 different areas, he excelled at it. And so because of really the blessings that God gave him in his life, there as far as riches go, as far as wisdoms go, as far as all that, he had a really good position to test it, and he still came up with nothing. Now, what we're going to look at is a continuation of that thought, and really we're going to be looking at it more of not just simply the pleasure side, but in terms of wisdom goes. And the main thing is just simply this: if things are so meaningless, are they also hopeless as well? Okay? So, looking at chapter 2, verse number 12, he says this: I turn my thoughts to consider wisdom and also madness and folly. What more can the king's successor do than what has already been done? Now, if you look at verse number 12, and you go back and you compare it to verse number 17 in chapter 1, there's a little bit of a similarity there. In verse number 17, he says, Then I applied myself to the understanding of wisdom and also madness and folly. And so now in verse number 12, he's saying, I turn my thoughts to consider wisdom and madness and folly. So it's almost like, he's said, okay, here's wisdom and here's madness and folly. And if I have my surface again, I'd be showing it on the board. That you don't have wisdom, madness, and folly. You've got wisdom, and then you've got madness and folly because they're opposites to one another, right? And if you wonder what is the difference between madness and folly, madness is going to be kind of a foolishness of thought, and folly is going to be a foolishness of action. Okay, and so you see that they're kind of paired up there together. And then on contrast, that you've got wisdom. And so he's saying, okay, now I'm going to turn my thoughts. Now that based on that wisdom as opposed to madness and folly, and then he jumped into it and kind of saw what was there in his life. Now he's kind of taking a step back, and he's going to be turning his thoughts to consider all of this and to kind of sum up things and really look at wisdom versus madness and folly. And so if we look at it and we say, okay, wisdom versus madness and folly, which is better? Wisdom. So obviously wisdom has to have a gain, right? We would think that. Okay? All right.
How you use it.
Huh?
It's according to how you use it.
So, verse number 12 and verse number 13 and 14. He says, I saw that wisdom is better than folly, just as light is better than darkness. The wise man has eyes in his head, while the fool walks in the darkness. But I came to realize that the same fate overtakes them both. And so he says, yeah, wisdom has an advantage. And the wisdom that we're talking about here is not godly wisdom that is going to direct us in a spiritual nature to have a better understanding of God, a better understanding of what we do for God. We're not talking about that. Instead, again, since we're talking about life under the sun, we're talking about just simply human wisdom. We're talking about just simply the ability to get things done. As a matter of fact, if you go over to that insights box, in that second paragraph, wisdom in the Old Testament simply meant skillful living. The word wisdom is also translated as skill in the Hebrew language. And so, we look at wisdom and we think intellect, right? Somebody who's wise is somebody who's smart. But not in the Old Testament. In the Old Testament, in the Hebrew mind, somebody was wise if they were skillful at something. And so, in wisdom and looking at wisdom of life, you're talking about somebody who had a certain skill about them as far as coming up with the best plan of action, knowing how to live life that is going to come across very well. And that's really when you look at, like, for example, the book of Proverbs, and as we're going to look at the book of Ecclesiastes, it really is just simply saying, how are you going to navigate and go through life best, okay? And so when you look at wisdom in that regard, that's what he's talking about here. He's talking about something that would be kind of like more akin to common sense, right? And so, obviously, somebody who's got common sense about them is going to be a whole lot better than somebody who is just, going through life, hit or miss here, there, not understanding anything that's going on, just simply having, things happen to them and then just react to the happening instead of having a plan of attack of trying to make things go the way they want to, right? And just like light is better than darkness, somebody who is wise man has eyes in his head while the fool walks in darkness. That's how wisdom is better than that. So we would automatically assume then that wisdom has a gain to it. But that's not really the case, because again, he says, then I realized that the same fate overtakes them both. Okay? Now, again, if I could put it on the board, I said we've got a certain formula here, and that is 0 plus accomplishments in life minus accomplishments in life. What does that equal? 0. Okay? So, if we look at 0 plus wisdom in life minus wisdom in life, what do you come up with? 0. If you look at 0 plus foolishness in life minus foolishness in life, what do you come up with? 0. And so, human wisdom is equal to human foolishness in Solomon's mind, in this case, okay? I know that really doesn't work out. It doesn't work out with, real mathematical equations. But as far as the way he's equating it, can't you see how he's coming up with the same kind of conclusion with it, right? And so that's why he says in verse number 15 and 16, he says, then I thought in my heart, the fate of the fool will overtake me also. What then do I gain by being wise? Nothing. So I said in my heart, this too is meaningless. For the wise man, like the fool, will not long be remembered. In the days to come, both will be forgotten. Like the fool, The wise man too must die. Boy, such a wonderful, such a nice cozy thought on such a gloomy, dark night. Don't you think? No? Okay. Thought I'd get a little chuckle out of that. All right. Page number 11 now. Let's talk about some questions. What are some limits to human wisdom? Again, what we're talking about with human wisdom is, basically akin to common sense.
Wisdom, human wisdom is the knowledge that you can acquire from your surroundings, or by
Okay.
studying or reading or documents or whatever.
Okay.
It's human, earthly wisdom or humanly wisdom.
Okay.
Not godly wisdom, but humanly wisdom.
So what's the source of human wisdom?
Whatever you can make it. I mean, you can study, like you said, in the old generations of like hunters and trappers, and when you trap for food, guys was experts in certain types of hunting or trapping. They had a lot of wisdom in this field.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
They
they
acquired the wisdom.
but they are human.
Yes,
Yeah, so
human.
the source of human wisdom is human. Okay? So what is going to be some limitations to human wisdom? Yes.
I would think for me, I'd probably be biased, even though I thought I was trying to be honest and fair about telling you something in wisdom.
Okay.
Maybe I'd be biased, like the trapper.
Mhm.
I wouldn't tell maybe the best place to put a coon trap.
Okay.
I'd tell you all about it, but I wouldn't give you my honey holes.
Okay.
Trouble with
Yeah.
human wisdom is that when you die, the wisdom dies.
That's why you gotta pass it on. I mean, as far as like trapping, well, I just use trapping because we did that. Like my boys would never pass it on to nobody. So you're right, it's gonna die.
Well, how about this? Are there limitations to humanity? Like what?
I can only jump that high off the ground.
Boy, that's pretty good.
Well, there's physical and mental both limitations.
Okay.
There's 100 things that can affect you humanly.
Okay.
Disease, whatever, injuries, loss of limbs, arms. I mean,
We don't know everything. Yeah.
you can be very limited very quickly.
Judy?
To me, human wisdom would be limited to your environment, what you're exposed to, and what you can gain from what's been written down by those before you.
Okay.
And that is limited to that.
It's imperfect, isn't it?
I can't know about Japan unless I go over there, or unless I read about it.
Right. And even
That
if,
would be a limit. Even if I read about it, I haven't experienced it, even if I experience it, I won't know everything, so you're limited by your environment and what you can read or learn
okay.
from people that have already been there.
And not only that, but if you look at it from a spiritual perspective, as far as humans go, we're corrupted by sin.
Yeah.
And so since we're corrupted by sin, we have got a skewered perspective already. You talk about you can't be objective, right? And, when you think about being corrupted by sin, we can't be objective about things because we've got those limitations.
You got prejudice.
You got prejudice.
Always,
Yeah.
everybody.
I mean, I was thinking the other day, sometimes I just, in my mind, I think, okay, what am I going to say if I run into this kind of person? Of course, I never run into that kind of person, and then when I do run into that kind of person, then I forget about what I was going to say. But anyway, that's another one of those limitations. But I started thinking about, what would I say if I ran into a person and had a conversation with them about hell? And they were going to say, well, wait a minute, how can you say that you've got a loving God, but how can a loving God send somebody to hell? That doesn't really sound very loving, does it? Okay. So, I was kind of thinking about that question in my mind. And I started thinking, well, you know, it is loving when you consider the, you know, what really is going on. When you look at it from our perspective, you can see that side of things. But when you look at it from the bigger point of view, you say, oh, wait a minute, this is the greatest love of all. And that is that, you know, as God's creation, then, you know, we are subject for God to do whatever He wants with it. You know, just like an artist, if they go and they make a painting, and then they're not happy with the painting, they don't have to put that on display. They can just paint over it if they want. Or they can just throw it away if they want. They can burn it if they want.
Or have a flood.
Well, it's whatever, because it's theirs. And so, since we're God's creation and we're fallen, God can do whatever He wants with us. But because He loves us so much, He's willing to send His Son to go through the pains that we do, to experience death so that we don't have to give us salvation as a gift. So when you look at it from that perspective, it is the biggest amount of love. But from the world's perspective, I can see where they don't see it that way. Yes, ma'am?
I just tell people that God doesn't send anybody to hell. People send their own self to hell.
Yeah.
By not accepting His gift. I mean, it's a present. It's just like if I give you a Christmas present and you never open it, you never really get that present. And God's given us all that gift.
Mm-hmm.
And some people just don't open it. So people send themselves to hell.
And we send ourselves to hell by what we do too. I mean, you know, I understand that we're sinners by nature, but yet we do sin, and we are not condemned because of our nature. We are condemned by what we do.
But it's our choice.
It is. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If we choose hell, then you can't blame it on God, because He gave you a ticket.
Right.
To heaven.
Right. So, do you see how human wisdom has its limitations, right? Okay, so in contrast to that, going back to our question, why is godly wisdom superior to it?
You don't think it has value.
Because there's no sin in it, there's value in it.
And it's no limitations.
Okay, yeah, no limitations.
If we have, God doesn't.
Exactly. You know, the source of human wisdom is humans that have limitations. The source of godly wisdom is God, who doesn't have those limitations.
And it's like complete and nothing to get to or take them from, so it's just what we need.
Yes,
The
absolutely.
best.
Absolutely. So here's the next question. What are some temporary advantages to human wisdom? Should we use it at all?
Yeah, that's good.
Well, human wisdom could keep you out of jail. Yes, in common sense.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah, oh,
Comfortable.
I gotta say, at school, there's the SR, the school resource officer that's there, and, you know, he comes into our room all the time. You know, we've got our own little group there when he comes in. It's kind of fun every now and then. But anyway, you know, the other day, the last couple of days, he's been really busy. And one thing that, and you know, I've got a little radio, you know, that the administrators, secretaries, he has one. And so, you know, I kind of hear everything going on the radio all day long. And yesterday, after school was already out, I heard one of the principals get on the radio and say, you know, Thurman, you better get down the road. There's some 911 call that students, or some of our students are brandishing a firearm. You know, and so I mean, it's like, whoa, you know. So, you know, well, anyway, so I wanted to ask him about that, you know, because when he responded on the radio, he was just like, yeah, I think I know who that is. And so, you know, I said, what was that? And apparently some boys were walking down the road and they found a toy gun that was beat up in the road, and they picked it up, and like boys are apt to do, you know, they were waving around and having fun with it, and then decided that the fun was over, so they tossed it in the bush and continued to walk down the road. By the time he caught up with them, you know, he's like, hey, guys, you know, what's going on? And so, oh, well, we just found this in the road, and it's over there in the bush. And he looked in the bush, and sure enough, you know, that's what it was. But he said, you know, if stupid didn't exist, I wouldn't have a job.
That's right. That's right. I think sometimes,
Long story, you just simply gave that one.
I think sometimes balance of human wisdom can sometimes bring us to realize that we're not rising up, figure everything out on ourselves. It can lead us to get to God, pursue godly wisdom.
That's true, but let's refine this to life under the sun again instead of stepping outside of it. As far as life under the sun, are there advantages to wisdom, human wisdom?
Even keeps us alive.
Keeps us alive?
Like you said in one of your sermons, you said, let us run through this highway. I don't know when, but remember you said,
Yeah, I
what
wasn't
if
really
we run?
wanting us to do that though. I just,
You gave some example or something.
yeah.
Yeah, so it keeps us simply alive too.
Mhm.
Finish your life, finish your food, welfare.
Yeah, I mean, as far as, and I'm not trying to say that I'm better than anybody, but I look at, people and the mistakes that they make in their lives, and, I just thank God that I have a little bit more common sense enough not to make those same mistakes, And I'm not trying to say that I'm better than anybody or anything like that. It's just that, there are times that our own actions result in bad
There was almost
consequences.
like a story, the guy, the Moody Bible College professor.
Okay.
I think it might have been Moody or something, and there was like a wino or something sitting in a gutter, and the two guys saw it, he said, if it wasn't for God, he said, that'd be me. So,
Well, yeah. Mhm.
so,
Yeah.
choices, I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah. And back when I was teaching teenagers a whole bunch, I keep on telling them, bad choices
Yeah.
beget bad choices. When you start to go down the road and make bad choices, it only leads to more bad choices.
Yep, yep, and that's
So.
true.
All right. Okay, so we kind of understand where Solomon's coming from, right? There is an advantage to human wisdom over foolishness, but at the same time, when you look at the big picture, it doesn't matter. Because we all come to the same conclusion. We all come to the same end. And so he's basing his whole life on human wisdom, and he's trying to figure out, hey, what's the gain to it? And he's thinking there is no gain. So he's going to come to his first conclusion. Now, Solomon makes two different conclusions here in this chapter. The first conclusion we're going to talk about, the second conclusion we're going to talk about. But at the same time, I want you to understand that there is also going to be a third conclusion at the end of the book. All right? If you remember, I said the book of Ecclesiastes, it's really important that you take the whole thing. Because if you don't take the whole thing, then you can come up with some really, really off-the-walls ideas. Okay? And so, conclusion number one, okay, we see where he's coming from. Conclusion number two, we see where he's coming from, which we're going to talk about. But conclusion number three is going to be at the end of the book where he says, remember your Creator in the days of your youth. And he said that the whole purpose, the whole duty of man is to fear God and keep His commandments. Okay, so that's that third conclusion. I just want to go to the end of the book and tell you about ahead of time so that when we hit the second conclusion, especially, you may be thinking, well, wait a minute, is the Bible? No, you gotta get to the third conclusion too. Okay, all right, first conclusion in verses 17 through 23. Okay, so in verse number 17 he says this, so I hated life. There is a common refrain for Solomon, hates life. I hated life because the work that is done under the sun was grievous to me. All of it is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. So he's thinking, okay, foolishness, wisdom, both go to the same place. So they both go to the same place. What's the meaning to me? What's the gain to me? If I'm basing my life on trying to live a life of human wisdom, and I'm not getting anything from it, any more than what the fool is getting from it, then what's the point and purpose? It's meaningless. And so therefore, he's thinking about all the things that he's done, especially since he's at the end of his life. And he's thinking about all the accomplishments that he's tried to do by human wisdom and realizing that they're really not what he intended them to be. And he's just like, I hate life. It's just grievous to me. As a matter of fact, in verses 18 and 19, we kind of see a little bit about why he feels this way. He says, I hated all the things I had toiled for under the sun, because I must leave them to the one who comes after me. And who knows whether he will be a wise man or a fool, yet he will have control over all the work into which I have poured my effort and skill under the sun. This too is meaningless. All right, so Judy, who was that fool that came after Solomon, and what did he do? I know she. Rehoboam.
Okay, yeah. Solomon could have been a very good father, you know? He couldn't, he didn't pass anything on to his son. He wasn't a good husband, he wasn't a good father, and I don't think he wasn't a good king. Because after he died, the people came to his son and said, your father oppressed us, and we've been oppressed for too long and too hard. What are you gonna do? So,
So sucks in advice.
He sought advice, and the older people that served with his father gave him good advice.
yeah, they said, go easy on the people.
Go easy on them, and they'll love you forever. But instead, he listened to the ones that he had grown up with, the ones that, you know,
I think
had,
teenagers.
well, and the ones that were the privileged, you know, and they said, no, go harder on them. In fact, what they told him was, if you think my dad was heavy, my little finger is as big around as his waist. And he scourged you with whips, I'm going to scourge you with scorpions. And so that's the exact response he gave the people. What ended up happening is the kingdom split. He had one tribe, the other 10 tribes went to somebody else, and civil war was only averted because God said, you guys, that's enough.
Knock it on.
You better knock it off. Okay? And so all the things that Solomon did, all the things that Solomon accomplished, as far as the material things, the accomplishments, the buildings, of course he built the temple, you know, and it had a spiritual purpose, but as far as his human achievement, it just, there wasn't anything there. And so here he is at the end of his life. And he's thinking, here I've poured out my heart, my soul, you know, to get all these things, to have this achievement, this feeling of pleasure that comes from it. And all of a sudden I'm realizing, hey, when I die, that's it. Somebody else is going to be in charge of it. And whether he's wise, whether he's a fool, I can't control any of it. He could run it into the ground, he could do something else, but it doesn't make any difference to me. And so in verse number 20, he says this. He says, so my heart began to despair over my toilsome labor under the sun. You know, despair is when you don't have any hope. And that's why you hated life.
Isn't that the main point? I mean, he put everything into building and acquiring. He didn't put anything into people. He used and abused the people. He didn't raise his sons right. He wasn't fair or good to his wives. He either pampered them or, I mean, how can you be a good husband to 1,000 wives? You can't. He lived for himself 100%. He did not live for anybody else but himself.
Well, here's the question. Who should he have been living for?
He should have been trying to instill wisdom and godly
Okay,
principles
God.
into his
Yeah.
children and his people and his wives.
Yeah.
And then he would have had a legacy that would have lived on after him.
Well, even still, you know, and if I had my tablet, you know, I said, you know, here's the way that we look at the book of Ecclesiastes. You know, man, and then, you know, we are the center of our own universe. So here we are, here God is. It's not that God is revolving around us to do for us. It's that God is over here separate and we're over here. That's the way that the book is approached. Really what it should be is God should be the center of the universe because he's the creator, and that we should be revolving around him. If we do that, if Solomon did that, then he would see that, oh, the gain that I have under the sun is rewards waiting for me heaven. Okay? But he doesn't look at it that way. And so even if, and the reason why I go on this route is that there are people who, okay, my focus is on people, my focus is on my family, my focus is on all this, but again, what is that going to do for you once you die? It's nothing.
Not for you, but you're gonna have a legacy that goes after you.
I know, except for you, it's still nothing. It's still nothing. And so that's why you've got to put God as far as the center. And in our duty and responsibility to God, then we are good husbands, good wives, good parents, good children, good neighbors, good co-workers, so on and so forth. Okay?
But God used him, Solomon, God used
Yes.
him to put, see, he made even his life, he did good out of it, yeah? For
Yeah, I
us,
mean,
blessings.
we've got Ecclesiastes.
Right,
to
we
read
wouldn't
and learn.
have this beautiful book if,
Exactly.
so God turned it out, he did it for good,
Yes.
even his life.
Yes. Okay. Looking at the questions. Is there a connection between achievement and self-fulfillment? Okay. Give me some examples. What is the connection between achievement and self-fulfillment?
Well, it depends on what your eyes are on. If your eyes are on God, then your self-fulfillment will be achievement, but it will be achievement on the godly level.
Okay.
But you can have achievement on the physical level or the human level, and it won't get you anywhere.
Mhm.
I mean, you may get some fulfillment out of it, you may not, and if you do, it's going to be short-lived.
Temporary fulfillment. If you build a house yourself, with your own bag of tools, you definitely have a feeling of fulfillment. Enjoy it.
Yeah.
You don't want a bigger one in a month, but you enjoy it for a while.
Oh, this house is wonderful. Until the first scuff is on the wall or something. Paul, Dustin, did you guys enjoy the Super Bowl?
For a while, I did, but it got rough there in the end of the quarter. I kind of said, oh well. The better team won.
I told you you were gonna win.
Yeah, and you're right. You're right. So I never watched the post, celebrations for any of the games. As soon as the game over, I turned it. But for some reason, I was watching it the other night. And I was watching the Chiefs player, and I mean, one guy. I mean, he was down on his knees and he was just bawling like a baby. Okay, and the Chiefs won.
Yes.
Okay, so, and Shannon commented, and I was, and so we were talking about it. And I just started thinking, well, okay, why is that guy bawling like a baby? He was bawling like a baby because he's happy.
Oh, I thought maybe he was bookie or something.
You bet against himself. He can throw the game.
He lost a ton of money. Maybe, I don't know.
We're supposed
I did my
I
best
see
to
what
throw
you're
that.
saying.
well, are we supposed to feel sorry for him if he wins?
Well, I kind of see the point. I mean, this is probably his dream since he was a child.
Sure.
It was ever since he was a child playing football I want to play in high school, I want to play in college, I want to play in the NFL, I want to play in the Super Bowl, I want to win the Super Bowl, and he's it, right? And so, for him, I mean, that was it. Of course, I don't even know who he was then, but I can kind of see where he's coming from. But there's some drawbacks to it, right? Next question. Do you think that some people today find themselves in despair because they can no longer find fulfillment from their achievements?
A lot of people.
Now, that football player, again, I don't even know who he was, but is he going to have that same level of fulfillment 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years
30
from now?
years now, 40, yeah.
He may look back on it, the good old days, the glory days, but as far as right here now,
laying there and got arthritis, and somebody feed you oatmeal with a spoon, you can say, well,
Then you're gonna feel despair.
you better believe it.
Yeah, so there really is a connection between, achievement and self-fulfillment. But also, if that's where the self-fulfillment's coming from, then from the lack of achievement is also going to be despair. Right? It makes sense.
Yeah, like a person, I don't know what words you'd use to talk to a person like that, but, like one of the easy things that, like what I thought of, was like witnesses, I told you this before, witnessing to someone and thinking, you gotta bring him to Christ. And you're whipped, and you say, it didn't work, I feel, like despair because I didn't do it, until a wiser person says, hey, wait a minute. All you gotta do is plant the seed, water the seed, and let somebody else harvest, or maybe you get the harvest after other people have planted the seed and things. Like despair. That poor person need to have some kind of person, what you call them, a counselor or a friend or whatever, to try to get them through that maybe what you're doing is really good, and not to expect a whole lot, and it'll come by in time maybe.
Well, that's why we got to look at the conclusion of the entire book. That's why I want to bring that up, of remembering your Creator in the days of your youth. And that the whole duty of man is to fear God, keep His commandments, for God is going to bring everything into judgment, whether it's good or bad. And so when we live our lives from that perspective, then it starts to break us out of we're over here and God's over here. It starts to put us more into the perspective of, okay, now we need to start remembering God. Now we need to understand that we're accountable to God. Now we see that there's a bigger picture. So, okay, moving on to page number 12, looking at the second conclusion in verse number 24. If you're depressed now, things start to get a little better, okay? Things start to get a little bit better. Okay, verse number 24. He goes on to a second conclusion. He says this, a man can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in his work. This too, I see, is from the hand of God. For without Him, who can eat or find enjoyment? To the man who gives, to the man who pleases Him, God gives wisdom, knowledge, and happiness. But to the sinner, He gives the task of gathering and storing up wealth to hand it over to the one who pleases God. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. And so, if we're just looking at this life here now, one conclusion that we can come up with is when we find something that's good, enjoy it. Okay? And if we have things that are good, we need to understand that this is a gift of God, and we need to enjoy it as a gift of God. Just simply put. And if you think about it, there's plenty of things on this life that we have, even on a day-to-day basis, that we can enjoy that are gifts from God. Sunday was a wonderful day weather-wise, right? Anybody get out and enjoy it?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, Shannon and I, Kenzie took the dogs, plural.
What's your...
That's not a good thing of God. I think that's from the other direction. Did I say that? Is it recorded? Is it?
That bad.
No, it's not that bad. But I mean, it was just nice to get out, feel the sun and everything like. I mean, that was good. Now, you could see that is a blessing of God. But looking at that third conclusion again, if we take that and we start to not remember our Creator, then all of a sudden we can take a blessing, we can start to distort it. I mean, if I were, which I did not, but if I were to use that afternoon to get rip-roaring drunk for the Super Bowl, okay, which I did not, wouldn't that be abusing the gift that God has given us? So when we read this conclusion about man can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in his work, this too I see is from the hand of God, we always need to remember that is in the context of that third conclusion. Okay? If we're looking at that in terms of, oh, well, God wants us to live for ourselves, God wants us to do anything there is for us, and that whatever we want to do, that we need to do it, we need to enjoy it, then we're not understanding that that's not really living in wisdom, because we're going to have consequences of those actions, and especially consequences in the next life. And so we've always got to put that into context. But at the same time, you know, if we are going through life, we need to find some things that God has given it to us to enjoy. And when we have those things, we just simply need to enjoy them. Okay? And he's going to come back to this conclusion time and time again, all throughout the book. Okay. Question number 1. Does God always take away from sinners and hand them over to those who please him?
No, not necessarily.
In what way?
Well, you know, a lot of, I'll just use a full illustration. You know, a lot of non-believers would please the Kansas City one. A lot of non-believers from San Francisco wasn't pleased that they lost.
That's true. That's true.
You can illustrate it that way.
You could also illustrate it as far as, you know, the people that were watching the Super Bowl. I mean, the ones that were in attendance in the Super Bowl at the game. Man, you talk about the upper crust of society, right? I mean, I just remember, you know, I was watching the game, just the camera panning around, and you know, oh yeah, this famous person, this actor, you know, and just, you know, all these famous people at the game. It's like, well, wait a minute. Some of those famous people are pretty good sinners. Why don't I get to go to the game? Even though it's on Sunday and I have to skip church. But you see my point? You know, it's not that God's going to take away from the sinner and give to the godly, especially in this life. But what about the life to come? Aren't we as Christians going to be made heirs of all things? We are, aren't we? All right, question number 2. If we have something good in our lives that God takes from us, does that mean we have done something to displease God? Can you think of some biblical examples to support your answer? Here we have something good in our life and God takes it away from us. Is it because we've done something to displease him?
Job.
Job.
My prime example for that. In my lifetime or anything I see in
Yep.
my vision, that I think of him.
Yep, well, that's the answer that I have written down.
Extreme.
Yeah. You remember Job? I mean, he's a man that God said he was upright. There was nobody like him on the face of the earth. And God took everything away from him.
God sometimes disciplines his children.
But not in the case of Job.
Yeah, that's true.
Not in the case of Job. You know, God, there was nothing about Job that he did that displeased God.
Yeah.
It's just that he had a different reason
Yeah.
for doing that. At the same time, if we're thinking, oh, okay, you know, God isn't giving me these pleasures, God is taking away these things. Why? What did I do to displease God? You may not have done anything to displease God. It could be that
Sometimes he
God,
tests our faith.
it could be a test for our faith. It could be for his glory too. I mean, that's the case
Yeah.
with Job, is that God allowed that to happen to Job so that people could see his glory, God's glory. You know, and he would be rewarded for it. Yes, sir.
You know, in my lifetime, I've seen a lot of people that lost children and stuff, you know. And, you know, I've been fortunate that I haven't went through that.
Yeah.
And I seen my mother go through it and that, and she was a good Christian, and she handled it pretty well, because, you know, it don't, like you said, it don't mean nothing. You take a young child, you know, you see a teenager or something, the Lord takes it.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know what his reason was.
Yeah.
He might have took him now to heaven because maybe 5 years down the road, he would have been in something else that
Yeah.
would have hurt him and his lifestyle, his
Yeah.
family.
Yeah.
So no, I don't even try to figure stuff like that out,
We
too.
came from,
No, and I mean, when my parents were killed in an automobile accident, you know, people were constantly coming up to me and saying, well, maybe it was for this reason, maybe it was for that reason. And to tell you the truth, at the time, that just felt very shallow and hollow and meaningless. Because I was thinking, number one, you don't know, and I don't know. And number two, I started to think, it may not be one reason. It may be 10, it may be 1,000, it may be 10,000. And it's not our place
Yeah.
and
to try to figure it out.
Anya Krauss said in one of his songs, if I didn't have a problem, how would I know Jesus could solve it?
Yeah,
it's like Job's friends.
yes,
Better if they were silent for Because
yes.
they were silent for 7 days and they.
I think it was 3,
I don't know. For
well,
sure.
whatever, it was a
Like,
while.
oh
or
my
something.
goodness, better if you're silent always. Just sit and don't say anything.
Well, then to, you know, do what they did. And I think that they started out with good intentions, but they had a wrong understanding to start out with. And their understanding was, you know, kind of like what we're reading here, that God takes away from the sinner and handing it over to the one who pleases God. So, Job, what have you done that was a sin? Well, no, it's not that. You know, it's not that at all. Sometimes it is, though.
David from
Yes.
Right, because
Right.
he sinned and God's punished.
And Solomon. When Solomon went and worshipped other gods, God chastened him. God sent 3 different people to be a thorn in his flesh for the rest of his life. And God said, I'm going to take the kingdom away from you and give it to somebody else. But because of David and your father David's faithfulness, he's going to have 1 tribe. So Solomon knew what was coming. You know, that was the, you know, when we read this about, you know, I've toiled all my life for
Why he
this,
was being-
and somebody's going to come after me. You know, well, he knew what was coming. Yes, sir.
7 days and 7 nights.
Oh, was it? Okay. I
So
stand
it's like
corrected.
that there is one thing that God will never take away from us, and that's himself. Hebrews 13:5-6.
Yeah.
Never leave us or forsake
Your
us.
conduct must be free from the love of money and must be content with what you have. For he has said, I will never leave you and I will never abandon you. So we can say with confidence, the Lord is my helper and I will not be afraid. What can people do to me?
There you go. And again, that's living life under the S-O-N, not S-U-N. That's actually a good contrast, a verse to contrast it. You know, because if we do live our lives with the love of money, then it's under the S-U-N.
And Jesus never did sin. Look what he had to go through.
Yeah.
No, if we do something bad, we sin as a Christians, God can discipline us too.
Yes.
He can do something, you know.
Yes, he
We
can.
even Christians, but he can, hey, you better stop.
And even when he does that, that's not a bad thing.
Good thing,
It's a
good
good thing.
thing, because we don't realize it, but
Yeah.
then we will think, oh, okay.
Okay, last question. If we follow Solomon's advice about enjoying and being thankful for the good things in our lives, would our lives be better? And how? From the outside or from the inside? You remember I said, you know, happiness that is originating from the outside is going and seeking pleasure. Happiness that is originating from the inside is something different. So if we follow Solomon's advice about enjoying and being thankful for the good things in our lives, would our lives be better? Is it from the outside or the inside?
From inside, because
Okay.
we will be thankful to God.
Mm-hmm.
What we realize He gave us and we thank,
Yeah.
we happy.
There's great satisfaction,
The
great contentment of leading a life, just being satisfied with God's blessings.
From the outside viewpoint, you make a better person as a whole for your friends and your
Yeah.
family and your neighbors and whatever.
Yeah.
Your outward flow or disposition or your outward disposition would be completely different if you're satisfied than if you're
You're not
unhappy.
you're not hating all things and despairing over life like Solomon's doing.
Not gritting your teeth because a neighbor bought a new car and you didn't.
That's right. All right, anybody have any questions or comments on this? I understand the book of Ecclesiastes is, very dark and grim, but when you put it in the right context, it's like, what, Olga, did you say it's a very beautiful book? It really is.
We learn from it a lot.
It is. And to me, it is an uplifting book when you properly understand it.
Properly. Because if we don't, I heard people were saying, oh, Solomon is not saved. Because when we read this, I come from yours and I go to yours.
Yeah.
And people say he's not saved.
No,
But
no.
he,
yeah, we'll get there.
when you read all book, like you said,
Right.
complete, not
Right. Yeah, we'll get there, because that's only in a certain context to prove a point.
And it's hard to understand them. We can't understand.
Well, we can understand, we'll understand that point when we get there. But, Dustin?
How many years did Solomon live and how many years was it before the time of Christ?
Solomon was king in the 900s BC. I can't remember the exact dates. I think the temple was completed in 960 BC, and that was in the early part of Solomon's reign. He lived 60 years, and he reigned as king about 40. So,
So he only lived to be 60 years of age?
yeah.
Wow, that's kind of short for that time period.
Now if you
He
got
didn't make
100
a
wives,
Yeah. Yeah, when you got as many wives as he did, that's a long time.
So that took years off his life?
Oh, sure.
yeah.
I don't see how.
Until he's not married.
Oh.
He married?
Yeah, no.
Kinda like
And
it.
let's just say that being henpecked by 1,000 women just down to nothing.
Okay, I guess that was overwhelming.
Kinda like you, though.
Alimony too.
No, he didn't have any alimony. He just had to keep up. He just had to keep family right
Good
there.
Marilyn
What
County.
he wants.
All right. Okay. Gary, did you have a question?
I was just going to mention that I hope before our Bible study's over that we read Solomon's prayer when he accepted the throne and dedicated the temple.
Okay.
Because that was good.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I mean, we're looking at one part of Solomon's life,
Yeah.
but don't forget about the other parts of Solomon's life. I mean, Solomon, even though at the last part of his life, things fell apart, and then we're looking now at all of his regrets down through it. You need to understand at the very beginning, Solomon was a godly man. I mean, let's just put it this way. When you were in your 20s, and if God came up to you in a vision and said, ask for whatever you want, and I will give it to you. How many people in their 20s would say, I want wisdom so that I can rule your people well? In your 20s. How many of us, when we're in our 20s, man, if I could just have a fast car and a lot of money, I'll be happy. Yeah.
I just don't understand how you can say he was a Christian and then read that he built temples to a God that demanded child sacrifices, and temples to a God that where you had temple prostitutes, male and female,
Yeah.
and brought that into his, I mean, if a preacher did that these days, would you say he's a Christian? I
Well,
don't think so.
I know, but
So,
I
I don't see how you can I don't see how you can
It's
say
hard to
that he knew God.
understand how he was really
Well,
God and
the only
I
thing
mean,
that I can
little
say,
babies being put into
I know.
the heated bronze arms of
I know,
a big statue,
I know.
and drums being beat to drown out the cries,
mhm.
and you say he knew God, and you say we're saved. I just, my mind can't put that together. I'm
mine
sorry, I
too.
can't
maybe
go
he
there.
repent.
I
And
just
at the
can't.
same one time in his life he repent.
Yes, I think he
And
did.
he deeply repent.
And
And
I
God
think we
accepts.
see the remorse.
Remorse,
Of it,
deep
Ecclesiastes.
remorse, right? We see this.
Well,
Dustin?
Paul did.
Where was Solomon's prayer at?
It's in First Kings somewhere.
Uh,
Yeah, First Kings, I think it's in chapter 7. The building of the temple is in chapter 7. No, it's in chapter 8. Oh, no, it's in chapter 7. No, it's in chapter 8. It's in chapter 8 and verse 22.
It's a long thing.
It is a long prayer,
Yeah, that's it.
and I'm not going to read it tonight because it is a long prayer.
Yeah.
and a lot of sacrifices.
Yes,
Thousands of
Oh,
sacrifices.
yeah.
but you know, seriously, if you want to read something, read 1 Kings chapter 8, verses 20 through 2 to the end of the chapter, and read that prayer. Okay. 10 after 8. Let's call it quits. Sound good? Okay, let's pray. Dear Lord in heaven, thank you for everything you've given us. Thank you for your blessings. And Lord, thank you for the wisdom that we have seen tonight. Help us to apply it to our lives and help us to make you the center of our lives and help us to not look to ourselves for our own satisfaction. But Lord, help us to just give our lives over to you so that we can be satisfied with doing your will. Lord, please forgive us of our sins. Please keep us safe as we go home. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.